pants have been with me my whole life. And so I made that submission to Fashion Revolution. It became like a centerfold page in their fanzine. And I realized, wait, there's so much going on here. And I started unpacking Fashion Revolution. And, you know, once you use an algorithm enough, pretty soon everything starts coming out. And all of a sudden, everything that you read is telling you, oh my God, you've got to change the way that you work. And for me, that was the realization that textiles was a dirty business, because I've always been a fashion hound and I've always loved textiles, and I didn't care where things came from. If I wanted them, that was good enough for me. And so to have this kind of transformative exposure created the opportunity for the Slow Fiber project, which started in 2017, and it's kind of an ongoing concern for me. But I started asking the question, where do my clothes come from? Who made my clothes? And what's my role in this? And so from upcycled, recycled, organic, fair trade places, I started working on what would be my capsule wardrobe. But by no means do I think that a wardrobe needs to be small. It needs to be accountable. And so, you know, you hear from people like Marie Kondo who say, if it doesn't bring you joy, get rid of it. And I say, don't you dare get rid of things. You bought them. They're yours. You're accountable. Make it work. And so, because where is away? When you get rid of it, where does it go? It ends up, you know, in the ocean, off the African coast, in Indonesia, in places where they're being bombarded with 8 billion people's bad decisions. I say no. I say don't donate. I say be accountable. And so the clothing that's in my closet now is a culmination of lots of thinking. From clothing that I've owned. I have things that are from when I'm 12 years old. I have things that I just finished making a week ago. And all of these things are things that I am proud to own because I am responsible for their source, for who was involved, for how I created them, how I treat them, how I handle my laundry, and I own all of it. And I don't donate. I never donate. So I'm careful what I take on. And so my closet is made up of black clothing because white clothing is a paper towel and it's destroyed quickly. Black clothing I can care for long term. It will last forever because it's practical. It's not everybody's favorite color, but it's always been one of mine. So I'm very comfortable in it. It looks a little funerary to some people, but it's my preferred color. So if my favorite color had been red, I'd have just picked red and everything would have been kind of red. But now I get to operate on texture and silhouette. So I make a lot of the same things over and over again because I have patterns that I have mastered. They're my patterns. Some are store-bought. I love the designs of Merchant and Mills from Carolyn Denham, who's the pattern drafter and owner of Merchant and Mills. I love her patterns because they reach into history a little bit and they're timeless all at the same time. So I'll use her patterns. I'll use my own patterns. And I tend to recreate things over and over again. And just end of 2020, I learned about hand stitching clothing. I've been sewing for 40 plus, maybe. My mom says I started sewing when I was 7. And I think it's a little later than that, but I learned how to make clothing by hand, you know, using books from Natalie Channon of Alabama Channon and learning the cathartic and important, just bottom line, important connection that I have through history, through needle and thread that's so different than machine sewing. So I get really excited when I get to make something from the ground up by hand. And I've learned how to make good, strong stitches in garments that feel extraordinarily personal, and that slowing down of the construction process. I will take forever. I'll do it forever. It's not to say that everything I make is by hand, but it's yet another tool. So I knit, I crochet, I hand stitch, I machine stitch, the things that are in my closet. And all the scarves in my closet, of course, are handmade by me, whether they're a piece of fabric or something that's been knit. I've learned how to buy shoes now also, so that if I buy shoes, I can feel good about their sources also. So, and I'm still learning a little bit about that, but I feel like I've kind of got the head to toe thing figured out so nobody gets hurt in the making of my closet. And that's the important part, to be inclusive, to be accountable, and to be sustainable.
Mm. And so the emotional and social well-being benefits of this approach, could you, go into them a little more? You've touched on some.
For sure. So I describe the social emotional component of making your own clothing as probably the greatest benefit. I think that the finished garment is the byproduct, but the making part, you have to break some eggs. And for me, there were areas of sewing that were not satisfying because they were stressful, like zippers and facings and things like that aren't the kind of joyful part of creating. They were just like the cost of doing business. I've learned how to move away from those things so that it becomes slow stitching. A lot of the work that I do is in my lap, meditative, constructing. And I there's not a day that goes by that I don't stitch. It's part of my living practice. Every night of my life at 10 o'clock, the whole world stops. If I'm lucky, it's sooner. But the whole world stops. Jackie's in her chair. It's well lit. She's got all of her tools right here, and she stitches. And whatever that work is, isn't as important as just participating in it. And so sometimes I'm too beat up at the end of the day, and I'll just do something mindless. Other times it's construction. Sometimes I'm stitching for teaching. And so I've started a class here called Meditation, Hand Stitching, and the Elements and Principles of Design. And that will start at the end of this month. With this in mind, that I know that stitching saves hearts, saves souls, saves minds. And so I think that the kind of Jungian effect of spreading this idea is saving people. And thanks to COVID, we all had to slow down enough to try something. Didn't have to. We got to slow down enough to try something new. And I will never not do it again. It sits in that same spot that knitting does. You turn on, you binge watch Downton Abbey, and you just start knitting. I binge listen, and I just start stitching. And I can't say enough about the curative effect of this work. I think it's important to classify, maybe in a few different places though, like just doing some slow stitching the way that Claire Wellesley Smith does it, where she's just stitching, is one kind of stitching. And then there's construction and the social aspect of stitching. The bee, I like to call it the hive, the hive mind knows. And I like here in this classroom, we like to bring people together to have these sorts of passive interactions while we're stitching. I think we're hardwired for it. I think we're genetically predisposed to this kind of work. It's sorely missing, as long as capitalism only works if people are divided in consuming. So when we stop consuming and we stop being divided, we go back to something that I think is part of how we're made. I think if you go back 90,000 years, I think we decided where we're first finding fabric prints in clay. It's 90,000 years ago. From that minute to now, the evolution of getting dressed has always been a biological imperative, and dressing your children. If you don't dress them, they will die. This is the history of construction. And as women, we are responsible for the safety of our children, for the comfort of our families. And so we're really, really, really deeply ingrained that fabric is part of us. And I believe that. So when we finally get to reach back into that after this long hiatus of it being somebody else's work, we're cured, we're saved. And I love sharing that. And I think that, like I said, I think there's a Jungian thing that's kind of passing around, and we're all the better for it.
And so workshops are part of your business, but can you also tell us a little bit about how Slow Fiber's working for you?
I think it's all I do is work right now. I came to this really wanting to know what the community needed, and the evolution of trying to become something during COVID still means that I'm trying to answer that question. I've learned that because there's only one of me, that I have to bring in others. So I bring in other teachers to teach in those times where I can't, and to teach in those subjects where I'm not proficient. And And the community building has probably been the most aha part of this. I kind of knew that it would happen, but not like this. Making places for people to find each other and share ideas and share skills has been the best part of the work. The money just has to take care of itself. I've had people come in here, walk in, look around, and start to cry because I think they feel heard for the first time. Because in our hearts, we all think that the things that we're touching here are they're intrinsic. And so it's the most life-affirming work in the world, to be able to sell you fabric that somebody else gave to me to just be the middleman, to be the conduit, and then to bring in what I consider to be responsible tools to further this interest. It's the best thing I've ever done. Aside, of course, from becoming a mother, this is the best thing I've ever done. And it's the only thing I think I can do at this point. Everything else, I think I'm kind of ruined for anything else. And so it has to be successful.
So you're talking to the converted in me, but I'm just wondering about what are the restrictions or limitations on other people? Like, why is, what's stopping people becoming more engaged with their wardrobe?
Fear. I think the most common excuse is I'm too busy, but I think it's an issue of this is not my priority, is what a person is actually saying. My priorities are somewhere else. And I've discovered that women post children have more time. Retired women have even more time. So the restrictions, obviously self-imposed, lack of interest. I don't have to, so I don't, I think, and then skill set. We have this, I was in the 7th grade when I learned home ec officially. Of course, I learned in my home coming up because I come from a long line of textiles women. But if you don't, you're not taught the importance of fabric or the importance of getting dressed. You're taught that it's just something that needs to happen. Let's get on with things. My best friend, her kids all learned about sports because in their house, that was important. Being a team player, belonging, accountability are all taught to her children through sports. And I see that. But that doesn't leave time for textiles, and so I think we have to make choices in how we engage. And I don't think we'll ever be able to get everybody involved in this pursuit. I don't know that it's possible until we just stop selling clothes in stores and people don't have a choice. Because I know when my mom was coming up in a small town in South Texas, she and her sister had their mother. She loved to sew, hated to cook, loved to sew. My grandmother made everybody's everything. So they looked fabulous. And then you went to town, you bought a hat and gloves to go with it. But if you don't have to make it, you don't, unfortunately. So I'm going to say the roadblocks are cultural. There's no real need, and a lack of education. I think if people understood that, if they understood who was being harmed in the making of their clothing, they would have to change direction. So education, access, right? I feel like I've hit them. And all I can do in my community is just teach courage, like, let's try it. Let's make mistakes. Let's start over. Let's work on it. Let's unwork on it, and hope that people are listening.
And regarding our sustainability issues, how are you contributing in that way positively?
Well, because I peddle in pre-owned fabric and pre-owned yarn, I'm taking it out of this person's hands and putting it into this person's hands. We understand that recycling is great, right? It's better than organic. Because we're not having to grow something from the ground up. So if we're already just relocating what's on the planet, getting out of this person's hand into this person's hands, that's the most sustainable because it's already here. Of course, I have to sell, new needles, new thread, some things like that. But everything else is here. Everything else. We don't need to produce anything for a long, long time. We just need to help it relocate.